On a cold Tuesday in October of 2011, a man named Donovan Reyes stood in the gravel lot of a closing-down farm shop in Ravalli County, Montana, looked at the woman who had just paid $400 for everything left inside. He was not unkind about it. He smiled the way a man smiles when he is certain, and he meant the smile to be a courtesy. 11 years later, in the spring of 2022, that same man sat in the front row of a county fairground arena and watched a sorrel gelding he had given up for dead walk sound across the dirt on shoes that woman had hammered out by hand, and he wrote her a check that did not say $400 on it. It said a great deal more. Between those 2 days runs the whole of this story, and it is not the story most people would guess. The woman who paid the $400 was named Cora Aldos. In the autumn of 2011, she was 31 years old, raised on a hay and horse outfit up the West Fork where her father had shot his own stock because there had never been money to pay another man to do it. She was known for 2 things in that valley. She was the steadiest hand with a frightened horse that anyone there could remember, and she was stubborn in a quiet way that did not announce itself until you were already standing on the wrong side of it. She had been shoeing horses for 9 years. By then, mostly part-time, mostly for neighbors, mostly for trade. She kept a small propane forge in a converted granary and a worn anvil her father had left her, and she did honest work that almost nobody paid full price for, because the valley had decided years before that horseshoeing was a thing you bought, not a thing you made. That decision had a name, and the name was Donovan Reyes. He was not a bad man. I want to be plain about that at the start, because the easy version of this story would make him one, and the easy version would be a lie. Donovan Reyes was 47 that autumn, a former large animal veterinary technician who had built something real out of nothing. He ran an outfit called Bitterroot Equine Services, and he ran it well. He had 3 trucks, a heated shop south of Hamilton, and a contract with 2 of the largest ranches in the county. He bought factory-pressed horseshoes by the pallet keg shoes, stamped out of bar steel in sizes 0 through 4, and he had a young crew that could nail a set on in under 20 minutes and move to the next horse. He knew his cost per shoe to the half cent. He knew how many head his crew could finish in a day and what each one earned him. He believed sincerely and with evidence that hand-forging a horseshoe in the year 2011 was a hobby, a sentiment, a slow and expensive way to do badly what a machine did cheaply and well. And for most horses on most ground, doing most things, he was right. That is the part people forget. The keg shoe works. His crew was fast, the work was clean, the price was fair. For 9 animals out of 10, he was the correct answer, and he had the numbers to prove it, and he was not shy about the numbers, which brings us back to the $400. The farm shop that closed that October had belonged to an old man named Errol Tfeit. He was 83, and he had been the last working forge and anvil farrier in that part of the valley, and he had not shod a horse in nearly 6 years because his hands had finally quit on him. He was moving to his daughter's place in Spokane, and he was selling out, and there was an auction bill tacked to the feed store corkboard that listed a coal forge, an anvil, hand tools, and shop contents, no minimum, everything must go. Almost nobody came. Donovan Reyes came because he came to every dispersal in the county to pick up cheap steel and a few hand tools, and he stood in the lot with his arms folded and bid on a roll-around tool cart and let everything else go for what it would bring. The forge, a coal forge with a hand-cranked blower and a firepot worn thin, drew 1 bid the anvil. 160 pounds of old wrought iron with a forge-welded steel face drew, too, the shop contents as a single lot. Every drawer and shelf and bin of what the old man had gathered across 60 years drew exactly one bid. And it was Cora's, and it was $400, and the auctioneer brought the gavel down on it before anyone in the lot could think better of letting her have it. She had not come for the forge, she had come for the shop contents, the boxes and drawers, because she had known Errol a little as a girl, and she could not stand to watch a lifetime of a man's tools sold to a scrap buyer by the pound. That was the whole of her plan. Sentiment, plain and simple. She would have told you so herself. Donovan watched her load the boxes into her truck, and he walked over, and he told her what he told her. He said a coal forge was a museum piece. He said nobody had time to pump a fire, to heat and hand-turn a shoe when a keg shoe out of the box fit 8 animals out of 10. He said she would be better off spending the money on a good rasp and a pallet of zeros. He said, son, in that fatherly way he had, even with a grown woman, you are about 30 years too late to make a living the slow way. She did not argue with him. She had learned a long time before that arguing with a man that certain only fed him. She closed her tailgate, and she said one thing, level and quiet. The only thing she said. She said, the slow way is the only thing that ever got the lame ones to walk. Then she drove home, and Donovan forgot the conversation before he reached his own truck, because to him it had not been a conversation. It had been a courtesy he paid to a woman, about to waste her money. She did not unpack the boxes for 2 weeks. High season ran late that year, and a string of saddle horses needed reset before the snow, and the boxes sat in the granary under a tarp while she worked. When she finally opened them on a wet evening in early November with the wood stove ticking against the wall, she found what anyone would expect an old farrier to leave behind, rasps worn down to nothing, coffee cans of pulled nails sorted by size, 3 pritchels, and a hardy and a battered set of tongs, a tin of borax gone hard as a brick, hoof knives honed down to slivers, the accumulated, ordinary, irreplaceable tooling of a working life, worth a few dollars apiece and nothing at all as a heap. In the bottom of the 3rd box, wrapped in an oiled rag inside a cigar tin, she found a hammer. Howler. It was not a fancy hammer. That is the first thing to understand about it. It was a turning hammer, the kind a farrier uses to shape a shoe hot on the anvil, with a flat face on one end and a rounded cross-peen on the other, and it weighed about 2 pounds, and the handle was hickory-worn black and smooth into the exact shape of a hand that was not Cora's hand. What stopped her was not the look of it. It was the balance. She picked it up only to set it aside, and her wrist knew something before her mind did. The hammer hung in her hand as though it weighed nothing and everything at once. The head had been hand-forged, not cast, and you could see the planishing marks where someone had worked the steel down and dressed the faces by eye, and the weight was carried forward in a way that meant the tool did the swinging and the arm only guided it. She had been hammering steel for 9 years. She had never held anything like it. A name was stamped faint into the side of the head, 3 letters and a small mark she did not recognize. And beneath the oiled rag there was a square of cardboard, and on the cardboard the old man had written, in a shaky pencil, 4 words. Hild made this one. Cora sat on an upturned bucket in the granary with the wood stove ticking, and held that hammer for a long time. She had to find out who Hild was, and finding out took her most of a winter. She started by calling Errol's daughter in Spokane, who was kind and had no idea, who said only that her father had always called that hammer his good one, and would not let another soul so much as touch it. She drove to the County Historical Society in Hamilton and sat with a volunteer named Pernille, a patient woman with reading glasses on a chain, who pulled boxes of old fair premium books and shoeing contest records, and set them on the table without asking why. Across that winter, a piece at a time, the story came together. Hild Sorensen had been a farrier in the Bitterroot Valley from the 1890s until the First World War, a woman which was nearly unheard of. Then the daughter of a Norwegian smith, who had taught her because he had no sons and would not let the craft die with him. She had made tools, the records said, for half the farriers in 3 counties, and she had a reputation for corrective shoeing, for fixing the feet other men gave up on, the club feet and the contracted heels and the horses that interfered and could not be made to travel straight. There was a line in a 1909 fair record in the cramped hand of some long-dead secretary that Cora copied out and kept. It said that the Sorensen woman could make a crippled horse sound when the veterinary had ordered it shot. The hammer in the cigar tin was one Hild had forged for her own hand. Errol had apprenticed under one of her apprentices 2 generations down the line, and the tool had come to him the way such things come, hand to hand, from someone who knew what it was to someone who would know what it was. He had used it for 50 years and shod the broken-footed horses of that valley with it. And when his hands quit on him, he had wrapped it in an oiled rag and let it go out into the world in a $400 box of scrap, trusting, maybe, that it would land in another hand that knew what to do with it. Now, there is a thing about that hammer that matters, and it is the kind of thing the whole story turns on, and it is real and not magic. A hammer like that has no power in it. There is nothing in the steel. What it has is correctness. The weight is right, the balance is right, the faces are dressed exactly right. And when a tool is that right, it stops fighting your hand. And when the tool stops fighting your hand, you can feel the steel under it. You can feel a shoe going right or going wrong through the handle, the way a good rider feels a horse through the reins. A clumsy hammer drowns that out. A correct one lets it through. Hild Sorensen had not built an enchanted thing. She had built one that got out of your way, and in a craft done by feel, that is, the whole of it. Cora learned to feel it that winter. She set up Errol's coal forge in place of her propane one, because she found, hammering with Hild's tool, that she wanted the slower heat, the longer soak, the way coal let her bring a shoe up gradually, and read its color, and work it through a wider range of temperature than propane ever allowed. She built a coke fire the way Errol's worn firepot wanted it built, a deep banked heart of fire with the green coal raked up the sides to coke down slow. And she learned to keep her steel buried in the sweet spot, just below the blast where it came up an even color, instead of scaling and burning at the edges. She relearned shoes she thought she already knew. She forged a plain front shoe and felt through the handle the moment the steel went from moving willingly to going stiff, the moment her old hammer had always hidden from her, and she learned to quit at that moment instead of forcing 3 more blows that did nothing but cold work the metal. She turned a bar shoe and felt where her old hammer had been making her overwork the heels. She forged a heart bar, the kind that floats the weight off a foundered horse's sore inner foot and carries it back on the frog instead, drawing the bar out fine and true to its point, and she got it right on the 3rd try where it had always taken her a dozen, and she stood looking at it on the anvil for a while, turning it in the lamplight, because she understood for the first time that the dozen tries had never been about her eye. They had been about her hammer. By spring, she was a different farrier than she had been in the fall. Not because of an enchanted hammer, because a correct tool had taught her hand what her hand had been doing wrong for 9 years, and once a hand learns that, it does not forget it. Which brings us back to Donovan Reyes and to the part of this story where the slow way and the fast way finally stood in the same field. In the wet spring of 2014, two of the big outfits, Donovan held contracts with, turned a string of broodmares out onto a flush of early grass the way they did every year. That spring, the grass came on hard and rich after a warm rain, and the sugars in it ran high, and within 2 weeks, 11 of those mares came up with laminitis, the disease horsemen call founder, where the soft tissue inside the hoof inflames and tears and the coffin bone begins to rotate down toward the sole. It is one of the worst things that can happen to a horse's foot. It is painful. It is stubborn. And it cripples and kills good animals every year. Donovan did the right things. He had his crew pull the shoes and put the mares in soft footing. And he had the veterinarian out, and they tried the standard rocker shoes and the pads and the wedges he ordered by the box. For most of the mares it was enough, or enough with time. But 4 of them kept getting worse, and 2 of those 4 were the most valuable horses on the place. A pair of full sisters by a stallion the ranch had paid a great deal for in foal that year, to a stallion they had paid still more for. By June, those 2 mares could barely walk. The veterinarian, a careful man named Royce, who had been in the valley 20 years and did not say things lightly, told the ranch manager that the rotation in both mares was severe, and that if the bone came through the sole, they were finished. He said the conventional shoeing had reached the end of what it could do, he said, and this is the line that mattered, that what those 2 mares needed was corrective forge work of a kind nobody around there did anymore. Donovan heard that and did not like it, because it was a thing he could not buy by the pallet, and because it was, though he would never have put it this way, a crack in the certainty he had built his whole business upon. He told the manager he would handle it. He ordered a set of the most aggressive therapeutic shoes his supplier sold, glue-on cuffs with built-up frog support, the expensive ones, and he and his crew spent a long, hot afternoon fitting them, and he charged the ranch what they cost, which was not a little. For 10 days, the 2 mares seemed to steady. Then they got worse again because the glue-on shoes were built to a standard shape, and these 2 mares did not have standard feet, and the support was landing in the wrong place by a 1/4 inch. And a 1/4 inch on a foundered foot is the difference between relief and ruin. The ranch manager was a level-headed man named Dell, who had been around long enough to remember Errol Tivate. He remembered hearing, the way you hear things in a valley, that the Aldous girl up the West Fork had taken over the old man's forge and was doing corrective work and was supposed to be good at it. He did not tell Donovan he was going to call her. He telephoned her on a Sunday evening and asked her to come look at 2 mares the veterinarian had nearly given up on. Cora came the next morning with Hild's hammer in her box. What she did is the point of the whole thing, and if I pass over it, you will think it was luck, and it was not luck. She brought no keg shoes. She watched both mares walk, what little they could, and she watched them stand, and she watched where they tried to set their weight, and where they flinched away from it. She had Royce's radiographs, the pictures that showed the coffin bones inside the hooves, and she sat with them on the tailgate of her truck for an hour, measuring the angle of the rotation with a protractor and a pencil, marking on each picture exactly where the bone had dropped, and exactly where the good soul still was that could carry load. Then she lit Errol's coal forge in the bed of her truck, and she made each of those 4 shoes by hand, one at a time for the foot it was going on. not a size, a foot. She forged heart bar shoes, with the bar running forward to a point under the frog, and she shaped each bar so that it floated the weight off the torn front of the foot and carried it back onto the frog and the sound sole behind. She set each shoe hot against the trimmed foot to read the scorched print it left, the way the old ones did, and adjusted it 1/16 of an inch at a time, and she felt every one of those adjustments come right up through the handle of Hild Sorensen's hammer. It took her 2 days. Donovan Ray's could have shod 40 horses in 2 days. She shod 4 feet. And when she nailed and set the last shoe and stood the second mare up, the mare shifted her weight back onto her hind end and forward again onto feet that, for the first time in a month, did not send her flinching. And she took a step, and then another. It was not a cure. Founder is never a clean cure. And Cora told them so plainly, and told them what it would take. The months of careful resets, the soaked hay and the pulled grain, the patient work. She did not oversell a single part of it, but she had bought those 2 mares and their foals, the one thing the keg shoes and the glue-ons could not, which was a foot they could stand on while they healed. Word of that does not stay quiet in a valley. Donovan heard about it within the week, and I will not pretend his first feeling was gladness, because it was not. His first feeling was that a part-time farrier with a coal forge and a dead man's hammer had walked onto his contract and done a thing he had told a ranch manager could not be done by anyone in that country, which was nearly true, except for her. His pride took it the way pride takes such things. He told himself the mares would relapse. He told himself it was a fluke, a lucky guess on a lost cause. He told the ranch when it came up that hand forging was fine, for a charity case nobody expected to save, but that it would never pencil out its scale. And that was true. And it was also beside the point, and some part of him knew it was beside the point. So he did what a sincere man does when his model develops a crack. He set out to prove the crack was not real. The county fair board ran a working farrier event most years, a low-key thing where a couple of shars would set up forges in the open arena on the Saturday of the fair and shoe a few horses, while folks watched and ate their fair food. In the spring of 2015, Donovan went to the fair board and offered to sponsor it, to make it bigger, to bring in a judge from out of state and put up the horses and turn it into a real demonstration of modern shoeing. He framed it as goodwill, and it was partly goodwill. But he also made sure Cora was invited, and he made sure the horses chosen were hard ones, the kind that test a farrier, and he intended, in the quiet of his own certainty, to show the whole valley in a single afternoon that his fast, clean, modern way met every horse the slow way met. He did not understand that he had just arranged the one thing that would undo him, which was a fair test in front of witnesses. Cora almost did not go. She did not care for crowds, did not care for the feeling of being put up against another person when the work was supposed to be against the horse's trouble and nothing else. Her father, who was old by then and watched her work with the quiet pride of a man who had taught her the first of it, told her she ought to go. He sat in his chair by the wood stove with his hands folded over the head of his cane, the same hands that had shown her how to seat a nail without splitting a wall. And he said one thing that decided her. He said the valley had spent 30 years forgetting how to fix a foot, and that somebody owed it to the horses to remind them it could still be done. So she went and she brought Errol's forge and Hild's hammer, and on a bright Saturday in August the arena filled up more than anyone had expected, because word had gotten around about the two mares, and people are drawn to a contest even when nobody will admit out loud that it is one. The fair board, to be fair to Donovan, did not rig it for him. The judge was an old man named Ansel, a retired farrier and horseshoeing instructor brought up from a college program 2 states away, a man with a national reputation and no stake whatsoever in Ravalli County politics. The horses were 3, chosen for difficulty. The first was a young gelding that struck one leg with the opposite foot when he moved, a gait fault that throws shoes and cuts legs. The second was an old roping horse with badly contracted heels, the back of his feet drawn in narrow and pinched from years of standing wrong. The third was a sorrel ranch gelding, a good, honest-using horse, with a low underrun heel on one side and a foot that had been getting longer in the toe and lower in the heel for years, until the whole hoof was crushing forward under the leg. The kind of slow ruin that ends a sound horse before its time. Donovan and Cora each drew the same 3 horses and worked them in turn. Donovan at his propane forge with his crew and his racks of keg and therapeutic shoes, Cora at Errol's coal forge with her tongs and her measuring and Hild's hammer. The judge watched, and the valley watched, and for most of that afternoon it was not a contest at all, because for the first 2 horses they were nearly even. That is the part nobody tells when they tell this story now. On the interfering gelding, Donovan's crew did clean, fast work and got the horse traveling straighter with a squared-toe shoe out of the box, and Cora did the same a little slower with a shoe she turned by hand, and the judge gave it to neither of them, called it a draw, and meant it. On the contracted heel horse it was close. Again Donovan with a slipper-heeled keg shoe and Cora with a hand-forged bar that opened the heel a touch more, and the judge gave that one to Cora by a small margin, and said so plainly, and the crowd murmured, and Donovan, to his credit, nodded. It came down to the sorrel. The sorrel's bad foot was past the point a keg shoe could honestly help, and the judge had chosen the horse on purpose, and Donovan knew it the moment he picked up the foot. The heel was so far underrun, so collapsed forward beneath the leg, that there was no good sound place left at the back of the foot to nail to, and no shape in any box that would put the horse's weight where his anatomy needed it. Donovan did what his whole career had trained him to do. He reached for the most advanced therapeutic shoe his supplier made, an aluminum wedge with built-up heel support, and he fitted well as it could be fit, and he stood the horse up. The gelding traveled better than he had come in, and Donovan's crew was pleased, and the crowd was impressed, and by the only measure Donovan had ever trusted, it was a clear success. Then Cora worked the same foot, and she did the thing that cannot be ordered. She trimmed that crushed heel back to where the living foot actually was, further than it looked comfortable to go, down to where the real angle hid under years of overgrowth. She lit her coal and brought a flat bar up slow to an even orange, and she forged a shoe with an extended heel and a rolled toe, set back under the foot to give the horse a new back edge to stand on where his own foot had failed to grow one. Into that shoe she forged by hand a slight asymmetry to match the one side of his foot being lower than the other, a correction no stamped shoe carries, because no stamped shoe is built for one animal. She set it hot, read the print, took it back to the anvil and adjusted it twice more, and each time the rightness of the adjustment came up through Hild's hammer into her hand before her eye had even confirmed it. Then she nailed it on. And the sorrel stepped off across the arena and did not just travel better, he traveled like a sound horse. A long, crushed forward look came out of his stride, and his foot landed flat, and his shoulder swung free, and the change was so plain that the arena, which had been polite all afternoon, went quiet in a different way. the way a room goes quiet when everyone has seen the same thing at the same instant and no one wants to be the first to speak. Old Ansel, the judge, walked out into the dirt himself. He picked up that sorrel's foot, the foot Cora had shod, and he looked at it a long time, turning it to the light, running a thumb along the back edge of the shoe. He set it down. He picked up the foot Donovan had shod on the other side and looked at that one just as long. Then he straightened up and he looked not at the crowd and not at Cora, but directly at Donovan Reyes, and he asked the one question that ended it. He said, "Which one of these did you build for this horse? And which one did you build for the box?" Donovan did not answer right away. I want to give the man his due here, because the easy version of the story has him sputtering. And that is not what happened. What happened is that a sincere and intelligent man who had measured everything his whole life looked down at 2 feet on the same horse, one shod with the best thing money could order, and one shod with a thing that could not be ordered at all, and saw plainly and for the first time the gap between what his system measured and what the horse actually needed. He had measured cost per shoe and head per day and margin per truck, and every one of those numbers had been right, and not a single one of them had ever once measured this. He looked at the sorrel's foot for a long moment. Then he looked at Cora, and the fatherly certainty was gone out of his face, and he said, quietly, so that the people near him barely caught it, "I have been doing this for 22 years, and I do not know how to make that shoe." It was not a surrender. It was something better than a surrender. It was a true thing said plainly by a proud man in public, which is one of the hardest things a person ever does, and the hardest of all for the kind of man who is usually right. Here is what did not happen, because the not happening is the heart of it. Cora did not gloat. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not say a word about the $400 or the pile of scrap or the old dust she was supposed to have bought, though every soul in that arena who had stood in that gravel lot 4 years before was thinking of it. She picked up the sorrel's foot one more time, the foot she had shod, and she held it so Donovan could see, and she showed him plainly and without a speech where the weight was landing now and why, and where the old shoe had been throwing it, and what the trim underneath had to do before any shoe at all could help. She talked to him for 10 minutes the way one craftsman talks to another, and Donovan Reyes, who had come to that arena to teach the valley a lesson, stood there with his hat in his hand and learned one. It would be tidy to say the change in him happened all at once, in the dirt, with the crowd watching. It did not. A man does not unmake 22 years of certainty between one breath and the next. What happened in the arena was only the crack opening wide enough that he could not paper it over again. The rest of it happened slower, through that fall and into the winter, in the quiet hours a man spends with a thing he cannot stop turning over. He drove out to the 2 foundered mares that September on no errand, just to look. They were sound enough to be turned back out with the band, both of them, their foals at their sides, the rotation in their feet arrested and growing down out of the hoof, a 1/16 of an inch a week, the way Cora had said it would. He stood at the fence a while. He had told the ranch those mares were a charity case nobody expected to save. They were, grazing 50 feet from him, and their foals were the most valuable young horses on the place, and he had been wrong. And standing at that fence he let himself know it all the way down for the first time. That winter he came up the West Fork to her granary, and he stood in the door of the forge that had been Errol Tveit's, and he asked her to teach his crew the corrective forge work he had spent a career deciding was obsolete. He asked her to take the hard-foot referrals his whole operation could not handle, the founders and the club feet and the crushed heels, on her own terms, at her own bench, for whatever she thought it was worth. Then he asked what she thought it was worth. She thought about it, standing there in her own doorway with the fire banked behind her, and she named a figure for the first year of teaching and referral work together. $40,000. She had paid $400 for the box that hammer came in. The number landed on Donovan with a force out of all proportion to its size, because it was not really about the money, and they both knew it standing there. It was the Valley's 11-year-long mistake, priced out at last and paid in full. He wrote the check standing in the granary door, and he did not flinch at the figure, and that, more than the check itself, was the measure of how far the man had come. A thing like this does not stop with one check. The corrective work spread. Cora taught the crew through that winter and the next, and two of the younger showers turned out to have the hand for it, a quiet kid named Beck and a left-handed one named Quint, who could read a foot almost before she finished explaining it, and they took up coal and learned to forge for the animal in front of them instead of the size on the box. And the Valley slowly got back a thing it had spent 30 years losing. Horses that would have been put down were kept sound. Royce, the veterinarian, started sending the hard cases up the West Fork, as a matter of course, and the two of them worked out a way of trading radiographs and notes, so the shoeing and the medicine pulled the same direction. Donovan kept his fast, clean, modern business for the 9 animals out of 10. It served well, and he was not wrong to, and he sent the difficult 10th one up the road to Cora, and was not too proud to, and the two ways of doing the work stood side by side at last, and each one did what it was good for. Cora kept Hild's hammer on a nail by the forge, where she could reach it without looking, and she used it every working day, and when the young shoers asked about it, she told them the truth. She told them a woman named Hild Sorensen had forged it more than 100 years before, for her own hand, to fix the feet the veterinary had ordered shot. She told them it was not enchanted, that there was nothing in the steel, that it was only a tool made so exactly right that it got out of your hand and let you feel the work. Then she would set it in the young shoer's palm and let them feel the balance of it, the way her own wrist had known something her mind did not, that wet November night on the bucket in the granary, and she would watch their face change the way hers had changed. Errol Tveit died in Spokane in the spring of 2017, and his daughter sent Cora the cardboard square with the 4 penciled words which had gotten separated from the hammer somewhere in the moving, and Cora tacked it to the forge post above the nail. Hild made this one, it hangs there yet. To Donovan Reyes in October of 2011, that hammer had been $400 of scrap in a dead man's box, a thing to be sold by the pound and forgotten before he reached his truck. To Cora Aldous, it was something else entirely, and to the horses whose feet it fixed, it was the difference between a sound stride and a bullet. And to Hild Sorensen, dead a century, it was the part of her hand that did not die. There are 2 kinds of knowing in this world, and that Valley got to watch them stand in the same arena, on the same horse, on one bright Saturday in August. There is the wide kind, the fast kind, the kind that measures cost per shoe and head per day, and is right about 9 animals out of 10, and builds 3 trucks and a heated shop, and is not to be sneered at because it shoes the world. And there is the narrow kind, the slow kind, the kind that lives in 1 pair of hands and 1 worn hammer, and cannot be scaled or stamped or ordered by the palate. That is right about the 1 horse the other kind cannot reach, the lost one, the one the veterinary ordered shot. A culture that counts only what is easy to count will always undervalue the second kind, and price it at $400, and tell the woman who paid it that she has bought herself a lungful of old dust. Then one wet spring the grass comes on too rich, and a foot crushes forward, past anything a box can fix, and the lost one needs what only the narrow kind ever knew, and the number comes due at last, and it is never $400. The old man sold his forge and walked away, the way a person walks away from a thing he can no longer carry, trusting it to land in a hand that would know what it was. It landed in hers. And every morning, still before the fire is up and the steel is hot, Cora Aldous takes that hammer down off its nail in the half-dark and lets it hang once in her hand to feel the weight come forward, and knows the way you know a thing in the wrist before you ever know it in the mind, exactly what she is holding.